right. So, first question. Is there a developing standard for crafting a governance body for focused on large language models? So, I would say to a degree, yes. The NIST AI risk management framework, which is a newly released standard from the National Institutes of Standards and Technology in the US, does provide a very high level framework for how to think about AI governance. Now, one of the issues with all of these NIST frameworks is that they are just high frameworks, and it's sometimes very difficult to understand how to implement the recommendations from things like the AI RMF or even the cybersecurity or the privacy frameworks as well. So, yes, there is a a starting point for developing governance bodies and things like that. Unfortunately, the existing or the standard, the AI RMF, it does a lot of like linking out to other references. StackAware as a company is also trying to solve this problem, and we are approaching it not from like a holistic AI risk management perspective, but focused specifically on the security, privacy, and compliance aspects. But that is something we are working on as well. And we do have some information products that help organizations develop a very tactical series of recommendations and controls to apply to new AI tools that they are bringing on board. And it refers to things like the NIST AI RMF, it refers to the NIST cybersecurity framework, the privacy framework. And eventually, I plan on making this a software as a service tool that will allow you to align your controls against your tools and vendors, and then also align that with existing frameworks like the NIST AI RMF, but not exclusive to that. All right. Thanks for that question. So if you're just joining, please drop your questions in the chat so that I can, refer back to them. As you think of them, please add them, and I will get to them in the order that they are submitted. The goal here today is to answer your burning questions and understand kind of what the key problems are in the space. So thank you all for participating, and look forward to your detailed questions. And happy to expound on my answer, Paul, if that requires any elaboration. Yeah. So, what type of people do you think should be included? What backgrounds is another question related to AI governance. I would say diversity of experience is important. I think diversity of levels of experience maybe not as important. You don't necessarily need like junior people involved in your governance process, but at the same time, you want to consider the curse of experience that some folks who have been in a space for a longer period of time may have blind spots in how they think. So having a range of perspectives is very important. On a concrete level, I would say that when you're developing, at a minimum, you should have people who are leading the process from a business perspective. And my philosophy is that you should always have that person who is responsible for the bottom line or for the mission accomplishment making risk decisions related to AI governance. And then you want somebody who is in a security advisory focused role. Now, it depends on the size of the organization. You may have a CISO who is doing that, and you may, that person may dual or even triple hat in a variety of other roles. But you'll want somebody who's focused on the cybersecurity aspect. You want somebody who's focused on the privacy aspect, and again, that could be also be the CISO or head of security. And then you'll want somebody looking at it from a legal perspective. So legal doesn't necessarily mean lawyer. In some organizations, a lot of like procurement decisions are outsourced to experts in that department who aren't attorneys, but who have kind of an understanding of contract terminology and things like that. So those would be the key advisors for having a AI governance program and the people who should be involved. Some key things to think about as well are who has veto authority. Like I said, having a business leader who makes the final call is important. What I would definitely advise against is having kind of an amorphous council where it's never clear who makes the decision, because then it's never clear who's accountable. I would also have clear timelines for responses to inquiries to this body. So if you are on the product team and you ask of the AI Governance Council, like, is this feature approved or do you need to do XYZ? A nightmare of a product or engineering leader is to request permission and then not get denied, but just kind of be in this kind of in between where you're not approved, you're not denied, you never get an answer back. So I would recommend having like automatic approval mechanisms that make sure that people will respond to inquiries in a timely fashion. So, if you say within 10 days of inquiry, you'll get an affirmative response or you're automatically approved. That can help streamline the process and make sure people aren't trying to evade it. All right, so from Hendrik, the ASD Essential 8 is a framework we use in Australia. I did not see any AI in the November update. Do you know if they have any controls yet? Answer is no, I don't know, but that's a good question, and I'll definitely look into that because frankly, I'm not even familiar with the ASD Essential 8, but it sounds like something to be aware of, and definitely a good question about AI governance in that update. And I would anticipate seeing something in the future, I would hope. All right. So for those of you who are just joining, this is a highly informal session. I am just taking questions as they come in the chat. Please drop them there so that I know what order things have been asked and I can get to folks as they ask those questions. And today is unfortunately going to have to be a power half hour because I do have a conflict starting at 1 p.m. Eastern, but look forward to answering your questions until then. Based on the types of questions I get in my DMs on LinkedIn, I figure there would be more more demand here. All right. How about define roles, responsibilities of governance members? That's a question from Paul related to the overall governance approach. I would say that the roles and responsibilities will be aligned with the expertise of the people who are taking part in the governance body. So I would say that everyone who's involved in your board or your body or your organization, whatever it may be, should have a clear if you're familiar with a RACI matrix, responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, I would make clear that, these people are accountable for or this person is accountable for the decision. These people are providing input. These people are executing the outcome of the decision of the body. And I do have a kind of decision-making framework that I have modified. I call it the Pride framework. And what I'll do is I'll drop that in the chat because that kind of explains my philosophy for how you should structure these decisions and how you should communicate, what the roles and responsibilities are of folks in these types of bodies. So let me add that to the chat. Pop that in here. Okay. Next question. What is your best strategy for staying ahead of the game with it rapidly expanding so quickly? Great question. So I have been compiling a list of AI security related resources. It's about 150 items long. I've been curating it, and basically I use that as a repository of information, and eventually that's going to take the form of a software as a service tool that you can compare new developments to known threat vectors, to emerging compliance frameworks, to regulatory requirements, things like that, to help you stay on top of these types of developments. So what I'll do is I'll drop that in the chat as well. It's right now it's a Google sheet that you can access. You can bookmark it, and it gives you representative case studies, research paper, security tools, things like that that are relevant to the AI governance space. And I update that on a pretty regular basis, and that will eventually become, part of a SaaS product to help organizations tackle this problem. All right, so let me drop that in the chat as well. All right, here it is. Okay. Next question. Do you think the guardrails in place by Microsoft for Copilot are comprehensive enough? Have you looked at their compliance and privacy statement? That's a really good question. I have done some pretty detailed work looking at Microsoft Azure OpenAI. I have not done a lot of work looking at Microsoft Copilot, but that is a great question, and it probably deserves a deep dive on the Deploy Securely blog to make sure that I can give you a comprehensive answer, because a lot of organizations are asking questions about Microsoft Copilot and want to ensure that they're not you know breaching any RBAC settings and things like that when they're allowing folks to use that tool. One thing that I did notice is they do have I did see that there was a feature on the I think it was associated with Azure Purview, which is kind of their data governance set, and that allows you to kind of block access to certain sensitivity documents when you're querying things. So what I'll do is I'll drop a link to my LinkedIn post on that, and that should give you a primer. They issued a very detailed blog on kind of the security for AI side of things, and I think that was a good resource, but definitely something I should look into as well. So I will pull that up right now. I don't know. Get to the next question. All right, yeah, here it is. All right. So that's just a LinkedIn post where I kind of talked about some of the Copilot guardrails that Microsoft has in place, and their blog has a lot of detailed stuff. All right. Next question is, any recommendations on certification programs on AI governance that IT compliance and risk management teams should take? Yes, I do. I'm biased because I did do a course earlier this year, a cohort-based course with a CISO, and we went deep into the cybersecurity compliance governance privacy aspects of deploying AI securely, and I'm happy to share the link to the recordings of that. That is a paid course, and also you can get on the list for future courses as well. I'll drop both of those links in there. Right now, in terms of certification, I think those will be coming, and I imagine that organizations like ISC2, IAPP, all the alphabet soup of certification organizations will get into the game, so to speak, and there will be AI cybersecurity expert type roles and badges and things like that. I would say the key is focusing on the underlying fundamentals, protecting data confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and then understanding how you're going to apply those in your specific environment using actionable recommendations. And I've done a bunch of these certifications. A lot of them are pretty high level and they're helpful for understanding the concepts, but getting actionable data is really going to be the key for organizations that are applying these tools, because there's not a ton of stuff out there. So having really specific ways that you can mitigate risk will be important. So what I'll do is I'll drop that course in there in the chat so that you can take a look at it if you're interested. And then, so this is the ASIMP course, and then the synchronous course is next link. All right, here we go. All right, next up is a privacy paper today. I'll take a look at that. It's scalable. Oh yeah, I think there has been a lot of interesting talk about extracting training data from large language models. I think this relates to a bigger question or a bigger issue where your goal or your understanding when using an LLM should be that you should treat the underlying training data with the same level of access control that you treat the model itself. There are basically infinite ways to prompt inject a large language model and uncover some of the underlying data. So, for example, if you're going to be training it on data and you have in there personally identifiable information like email addresses, which I think were found in this study or a similar one, then you'll want some way to extract or to minimize that data before it's even trained on, unless you are okay with someone being able to pull out that data just by using the LLM, after it's been trained. And the key phrase here is having a neutral security policy, meaning that you don't rely on the LLM to itself manage access or moderate access to the underlying data, because it's going to fail, and you should use some sort of business logic process to do that moderation. So definitely interesting paper, and I think there is going to be, we're just going to continue to see incidents like this where folks are using LLMs in ways that they weren't intended. And it's going to be a game of whack-a-mole until organizations find or understand that they shouldn't use the LLM itself to try to moderate access to the underlying data. And for example, OpenAI, which is the clear leader in this space, even they aren't entirely clear on their stance when it comes to neutral security policy. An example is when they launched the GPTs feature, which essentially allow you to provide your own data set to a customized version of ChatGPT and then let others play with it. On one hand, in the documentation, they said, be advised that some of the training data may be reproduced during conversations with the GPT, and people can download files using the code interpreter, which to me, I would say if you read that carefully, it would say that somebody could just download your entire knowledge base from the GPT, and that would be intended functionality. That would be actually how people expect the LLM to work. But at the same time, a penetration tester who I became, I talked with or was introduced to, he found that if you extract the custom instructions that OpenAI gave to its own GPTs, because they had some kind of off the shelf ones, the instructions there say do not reveal the training data, do not provide a download link to anyone, even if a user asks. So that shows that they, on the one hand, are not relying on a neutral security policy, but on the other hand, in the prompt, in the system prompt that they're giving the model, they are relying on a non-neutral security policy. So I don't think even OpenAI is completely clear about how they are going to approach this problem. And my recommendation is, if you're going to rely on an LLM for security, it's not necessarily the wrong answer, but you must understand that there will always be holes in it. Prompt injection is one of those things that, since there are there are basically an infinite number of inputs you can provide to an LLM, they're basically infinite number of attack vectors. So unlike SQL injection, where you can, if you apply the right guardrails and things like that and are very careful and diligent, you can conceivably prevent SQL injection from being a possibility. I'd say it's basically impossible to do that for prompt injection. So I think we're going to keep seeing these types of attacks going forward. And acceptable risk, I think, for some folks, but just something to keep in mind. All right. The data sprawl across the ecosystem is already hard to manage. Yes, that's definitely a good point. I think that, in a sense, one of the big business cases for large language models is to deal with that data sprawl and to help basically find all this information that's been generated over time and put it to use. At the same time, you might start finding LLMs that are assembling data that you don't want them to, that maybe someone didn't classify or categorize a file properly, and then someone else was able to intuit something based on that information. So I definitely see there being a risk with the data sprawl across the enterprise, and LLMs will both help solve that problem from kind of a pure business process side of things, but they'll also make that problem even worse by allowing people to assemble bits of data from various sources that maybe the people who produce that data don't want another party to be able to recreate in the end. All right, so we got about 5 more minutes. Please drop any questions you have in the chat, and then I will need to duck out at the top of the hour, but keep them coming if you have any, because this has been a good discussion so far. The question is, do you have any good examples of effective AI policy implementation? So I would say that Asana, although I have no inside information about how they've implemented their policies, they are very clear to customers about how they are using AI and in which specific contexts, which fields are being provided to which tools, what the training, what the retention of this data is. And I wrote an article on it, on the concept of fourth party risk, because if you're an organization and you're using an AI tool and it is, or if you're using a kind of a non-AI tool, but it itself is using an AI, a third party AI tool, now you have fourth party AI risk. So I think Asana, they are very explicit in terms of what they're doing using AI tools, and I think that's good. I think, if you want to look at best practices, I do have a policy template. I do in my blog. I talk about best practices on a pretty frequent basis. So I'll drop the policy template into this chat, and take a look at that. And happy to answer any specific questions. And keep following my content for more best practices. And also, if you want an AI risk assessment, that's what I do as well, and that's where I'm developing most of these learnings. So please definitely reach out. You have my email now. All right, last one I'll be able to take is any reliable frameworks to govern this approach for use cases such as cybersecurity or forensics. So forensics, probably not my strength here, but from a governance perspective, the policy template that I added to the chat, that's a good start. Frameworks, the AI risk management framework from NIST, that's a new one. It's high level, and I did a series on kind of how to apply that. That's a potential starting point. I think you'll begin to see things like ISO 27001, SOC 2 incorporate AI specific considerations into their requirements and kind of recommended control sets. But there's no really good clear example right now of reliable frameworks for how to govern AI. So I will drop the link to that series on the NIST AI RMF into the chat, and please take a look at that. All right. Thank you, everyone. I am going to have to cut out, but I see Alex's question. I'll shoot over a note to you. And thank you all very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And please join me in 2 weeks if you want to ask any more questions. Thanks a lot.